Today on the show, strategy plus action equals the right time for getting acquired. Success in business and life is a constant back and forth of charting your course and taking the consistent steps every day to move you forward. Both are critical. My guests on this show range from hardworking entrepreneurs starting from scratch to visionary leaders of cutting-edge companies looking to scale. I help you understand the strategies that are working for them and the actions you can take to model their success. For me, a show like this is all about joining forces with my guests to dig deep and create something new for you. Whether that's a small insight that gets you unstuck or a path of massive growth through customized marketing and creative sales initiatives. Welcome to Strategy in Action. Welcome to episode 31 of Strategy and Action. I am excited to bring this episode to you. I know I say that a lot, but I truly am. We got Chintan Sutaria on the show today, and his company CalcuQuote is this incredible software company specialized in the space for contract manufacturers. I've had the good fortune to know Chintan for several years now, back from my Dallas startup days. And I've been so impressed with him, not only starting this company in this great little niche area that he had very unique, specialized knowledge in, but the way that he's incrementally grown over the years, just expanding, making sure that he has a solid, amazing product, then a solid, amazing company, and growing and expanding. And when we caught up a few weeks ago, he talked about the acquisition of his company that's happened in the last couple of years. And there's so many insights that I thought would be useful for you, and wanted to have him on the show for that reason, among many others, including growing his business. But a lot of these insights that, even if you're not going to sell your company, a way to approach that process, and even contemplating whether or not you want to or could benefit your company, in thinking about it in ways that maybe you never have before. And of course, we get into where he's taking the company next. So let's jump in. Welcome to the show, everybody. Chintan Sutaria is here with us. Chintan, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jason. I'm really excited to be here.
Oh man, this is so fun. So we go back a few years, back in the Dallas startup days, and I'm so excited to have you on the show talking about your company CalcuQuote and some very unique aspects and things that have happened over the last couple of years. I mean, talking about the company alone is fascinating to me. I've been interested and enjoyed following your journey over the last few years, but as you've gone through this acquisition process, wow, the insights and going into new markets and all of these things, I'm anxious to kind of pull some of those nuggets from you there. So why don't you tell everybody a little bit about CalcuQuote and when you guys got started?
Yeah, absolutely. So CalcuQuote really started as an idea on a whiteboard back in 2014. So I was in my old bedroom at my parents' house, and it was like me and two friends getting together saying, there's got to be a better way to do this. We were just drawing stuff out, right? So that was 2014. In 2015, I was still working on another startup, and we got the first version of CalcuQuote ready, and said, okay, let's see if this thing gets any traction. So we got a couple customers, but I still wasn't convinced. And then I said, okay, there's this trade show at the end of the year, and we're going to go to this trade show. And if we get, I think I set a benchmark, like if we get 2 customers that I've never talked to before, then we know we have something here, right? Like it's something that I can sell broadly. Well, we ended up with 16 leads and 12 customers coming out of it. And I was like, oh, okay,
wow.
Now this is pretty cool.
And give us that background on what it is and that initial problem you were solving.
Absolutely. So what we do is we work with electronics contract manufacturers, and these are companies that are building electronics assembly. So, think of your phone, a DVD player, anything. Those are kind of consumer goods sides, but there's also electronics in literally everything in the world, right? Like almost like just all over the place. So our customers are the people behind the scenes, not the brand names that you're used to, but the people that are actually manufacturing and assembling these things. So the best known example in the world today is probably Apple and Foxconn, right? Apple designs the iPhone, Foxconn manufactures it. So same kind of concept. Our customers are the people behind the scenes that don't own the intellectual property of the product, but they are manufacturing the product. What we do is we help them with their quoting and their purchasing processes. So here's kind of how the world worked before CalcuQuote came along is if I'm a contract manufacturer, my customer comes to me and says, I have this electronics thing. I want you to manufacture it for me. Make me 500 of these. How much will you charge? And what I have to do as a contract manufacturer now is look at every piece of material that's in there and individually price that. So I have to go into the market and say, who has this? How much does it cost? Is it in stock? What's the lead time for delivering it? All of those things, right? So you can imagine, like, if you...
Yeah, every little tiny piece of that thing, that product,
resistor, capacitor, LED, like all of those things, right? And like your typical electronics assembly has hundreds of parts in it, right? So you start to think about how complex that gets. So you have this huge spreadsheet. They have to go spend hours and hours and hours researching, and then you come up with the material cost, and then you have to figure out how much is it going to cost in terms of labor and machine time to actually assemble it all, and then you add in the risk and all of those things. So that's what our software helps with. Is on the material side, we're kind of like what Kayak or Travelocity did for airlines, is what we do for electronics components. So you put in your list of parts, and CalcuQuote goes out to the supply chain all over the world, all these different companies, and says, who's got this part? How much does it cost? What are the purchasing terms? All of that stuff, compiles all of that information back so that the EMS company can say, I've got all this information at my fingertips now. Let me just run it based off of these parameters, and here's my material cost. So what used to take hours and hours, if not days, of work, now takes 2 minutes.
Wow. And that was exactly my question as you were going through that laundry list of what to do. I mean, I know how long it takes sometimes just to put a simple video quote together, right? And just like, okay, I need to factor in some travel and this and that can take a day, to get all that together. I can't imagine that complexity of all of those components. That's incredible. So were you really the first to sort of put that together in a meaningful way for these manufacturers?
Yeah, so we were the reason that we, I think, had this like unique position is because I had done the job myself before. I grew up in this industry. I didn't come at it as a software developer. I came at it as somebody who had the problem personally. And so for me, it was, okay, I know a lot of nuances that go into this. So it's not as simple as just bring the pricing back. You got to think about, okay, when I load it into the machine, I have a certain amount of setup scrap and then a certain amount of run scrap. And then when I put the pricing together, I got to think about how much excess material I've got and what is the value of that. There's some complexities related to supply chain in there that, having done the job, you understand. And so while there was softwares out there in the past, one, they weren't able to do that instant pool of information like we were. And two, they weren't designed around the use case of a user. They were designed around the use case of a software designer. And so that's where we kind of found our niche, was to say, we understand you as well as you understand the problem you're trying to solve. The challenge was being the first out of the gate. And the reason we hesitated, we knew the value proposition was there, but the reason we hesitated is because we found that people didn't believe a solution like this could exist. It was like black magic, right?
Right. Yeah, you think about like that process that you just described, that was the original process. You can imagine that's been happening in the last 30 years, right? Like done in this way. Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. We had actually, one of my favorite stories is one of those first customers we had. I was meeting with the buyer. So the company owner was like, hey, this looks good to me. It sounds good, but we got to make sure it's real. So you're going to sit down with one of my buyers and try a real quote. Right. So she shows up to this, back then it was GoTo meeting or something like that. And we get on this thing, and she logs in, and I'm just telling her where to click and what to do. And 22 minutes later, she has a complete thing, and she starts laughing. And I'm like, did it go wrong? Like, what happened? And she goes, you should see my calendar. I blocked off the next 1.5 days to work on this. And we just did 22 minutes. So,
oh my goodness.
How to use the software. So yeah, it was very impactful, but getting somebody to even sit down and recognize that this is a possible solution to their problem. It's like, how could something only take seconds when I'm used to spending hours on it?
Oh, that's incredible. And yeah, and then that becomes the challenge, right? Like, it's great. You speak the language, which is way different when you sit across from that person. And, they come out in little ways and big ways. And those aspects of the software that you can point out because that these are the ones that they're going to go, oh, okay, they get us, they understand. But it's sitting across from them, right, and getting that chance. So trade show, like you said, that was great. What were those next steps? How did you overcome that challenge of getting in front of more folks?
Yeah. So really, it was for a few years. It was just just grind, right? So in 2015, like at the end of 2015, after the trade show, we had figured out this thing where if we made 100 calls, we'd get one customer. And that was like about the ratio, right?
Yeah.
And so we started making a bunch of phone calls. And then I said, oh, well, there's got to be an easier way. So I started writing a bunch of emails and then following up with a phone call. And then, we just kind of evolved from there. We hired a salesperson as we got more revenue. In 2016, we raised some money, which would allow us to kind of scale a little bit more. So we did that. And we used a lot of that to experiment with new things because we understood the customer so well, customers came back and said, hey, I've got this other problem that you could also solve for us. Or, you do this really well. Have you considered this other layer on top that would take this one step further? So we kept going down that path. But yeah, to be able to scale it, it was a lot of just direct selling, like old school. Let's pick up the phone and talk to customers, introduce ourselves, and be authentic about it. And that really helped. And even now, it's at least in the United States, a lot of these companies know me personally. I get text messages and phone calls from owners of these companies just because I called on them 5 years ago and they're like, hey, I remember you. What'd you do with that idea that you had? And it's like, oh, well, now it's a real thing. You should buy it. So, yeah.
That's awesome. Well, yeah, because there's the evolution there too of, plenty of people don't want to be first. They want to have this thing really working. And so it's just been great to see that trajectory. I love the fact that what you talk about there isn't, well, we had this one magical thing that no one else was doing. Like, no, I picked up the phone and we flipping called people, over and over and over again.
There's this one customer and cold calling is brutal. Like if anybody's ever done it, they know it's not fun. And I'm an introvert by nature. And so for me to pick up the phone and call somebody and, get rejected by a receptionist, it was not a fun experience. But I remember realizing how important it was because I called this one company and they, tried to dial in, they had one of those automated directories and I was like, oh, I looked up who the CEO was. So I tried to punch into the CEO and he answered. And I was like, oh crap, I wasn't ready for this. Right. And so I'm talking to him, babbling away. He goes, hang on, I'm going to put you on hold for a second. He puts me on hold, comes back a few minutes later. He goes, okay, and he had like 7 people walk into his office and he goes, I've got them all standing here on speakerphone. And I told them to give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down when they've heard enough. Go. I was like, wow, okay, let's go. Pitch competition time. So, you get those kinds of, it was kind of like a little morale boost, like, hey, this can work, just to talk to people. And if nothing else, you get rejected and you learn from it. But you don't get those rejections if you hide behind a mass marketing campaign that doesn't give you feedback. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's so true. Did you win that one? Did you get that one?
I did. Yeah. They are still a customer and they are still big fans. So
that's awesome. Yeah, and that's part of the thing too that is uncomfortable. It does suck, and there's an evolution to it. And in the beginning, and you're scrapping, and you've got to get this figured out. Like, yes, like it's not just the numbers game, which you guys found, but it's also those conversations. It's having somebody go, well, man, this would be perfect if it had this, like, and you would never even think about that if you hadn't had that conversation and that interaction. And of course you can evolve and you can hire somebody else to do it, over time, or, go, build in these other marketing aspects and sales aspects as you just get more resources and get known a little bit more, have more success stories to point to and things like that. But it's such a powerful way to build any business, is just having conversations. And I think that's a better way to think about that process too than got to make 100 phone calls, got to make all these cold calls. You're like, no, I need to talk to people. And so how am I going to talk to people? Well, I've got 6 ways. Let's go, so that's exciting.
It definitely helped to not think of it in terms of like, here's a script I have to follow. It was like, I'm just going to talk to you and see if you've got 5 minutes in your day to have a conversation about a problem that you're probably experiencing. And if, I found that if I read off a script or something like that, that was, it made me feel like a telemarketer and, like not good about what I was doing. And it also made them be more off-put, right? And so instead it was just better to say, hey, I just want to talk to you because I've done this thing before and I feel like you're probably doing something similar. And I think I found a solution. What do you think? And you're like, oh, okay, let's talk.
That's genius. That's such a great approach of, CEO to CEO, basically, in that approach. And you can take that mindset, no matter where you are in your company, but taking that approach and that dynamic is really strong. And you had that too, which is so great, that extra, not only in when you design the product, but now in having these conversations, like, I've been there. I've been exactly where you are. I've gone through that, just like you mentioned. That's great. So this wonderful evolution, as you build the company and you're going, obviously then, more competition, eventually starts coming in and everything. And one aspect of things that has happened with the company is an acquisition. And I'd love to really dig into this topic because when we caught up the other day, it was so insightful to me on why you chose to even go down that road, and then the benefits. And now you're breaking into new markets and all of that. And so there were some key insights that I wanted to make sure that we covered. So when did that process even start? Number one, like, were you even thinking of it? Were you approached out of the blue?
Yeah, good question. So I'll say right before this, I had worked in electronics manufacturing. It was a family business, and I had to help basically my dad sell his business. And what I realized is just record keeping is 90% of the battle, right? So when we started CalcuQuote, I was just anything that had a signature on it, I put in a little Google Drive folder, right? And that was my if ever somebody asks about what have we done as a business, like all of that's in here, all customer contracts, all everything.
Wow.
What I didn't do is get overly formal about it. So I didn't spend a bunch of money on lawyers to design a bunch of things or just all this stuff that is distracting from you talking to customers, right? So put everything into a bucket and said, if ever I need it, it's all in this big pile over here in a Google Drive folder. So that was kind of step one. But I never really, an exit wasn't like the reason I was doing this. It was more like, hey, this is cool. We're solving a problem. We're helping small businesses. Like, this is fun, right? We periodically would get approached as we started getting traction. We'd periodically get approached by other companies saying, hey, are you interested in selling, blah, 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 right? And for me, it was always like more of a passion thing than anything else. And so I was like, no, I don't want to sell the business for it to be, broken into pieces and sold off to a scrapyard, right? Like, that's not what I want. I want to make a bigger dent on the industry. And I think there's a vision here that can be accomplished. So I was always like, I'll entertain an idea of, joining forces with somebody if it aligns with the vision I have. Around 2018 is when we first started entertaining the idea of an international growth, right? So we had really good traction in the US. We were growing pretty quickly. 2018 was like a record year for us, and says, oh, well, we should start to expand internationally. There's companies all across the world that could use this. And it was hard. It was really hard, right? Because aside from time zones, there was all kinds of things that we didn't foresee. So there was currency conversion that, in America, we're so isolated with US dollars everywhere, but you go into any other country and they're like doing mental math between 7 different currencies. And you're like, oh, you do that? That's cool, right? They're speaking 4 different languages and all this stuff. So we found out it was really, really hard. And especially for me personally, I'd never really traveled Europe or had that exposure to understand the business culture or anything like that. So beginning of 2019, we're kind of facing this problem of, okay, we have a handful of customers. I think we had like 2 or 3 customers outside the US that were, that had found us through random coincidences, but we really weren't able to like expand from there. So 2019, I get this email from a Finnish company, and it was, hey, I'd like to talk to you about your business. and I thought it was spam, so I deleted it. So then like a couple of months go by, and they went to our website, and we have this, schedule a demo tool, like a calendar link on there. So they schedule a demo, and I'm like, these guys again? It's probably spam. Like they're confused. So I handed it off to somebody else on our team and said, hey, it's an early morning meeting. If you don't mind, take it and just let them know this isn't for them. It doesn't make sense, and thanks, right? So Caitlin, she's our COO now, she gets on this meeting and she's just like, hey, tell me about what you're looking for. And they're like, oh, we're looking for this, the supply chain software that does this, this, and this. And she's like, well, we do that, but not for you, right? Like you're a telco company. It doesn't make sense. Like you're not our target customer. And it doesn't, like, we don't want to waste your time on you trying to make this software fit for a unique use case. He's like, well, if it does what you said, we want to buy it. And she's like, really? Like, I don't think you're understanding. Like, you don't want this software. And he's like, no, we want to buy the company, is what we're saying. And so she's like, oh, okay. I think I'm the wrong person for you to be talking to. So I end up getting on the phone with them, and we have a couple conversations. But anyway, long story short, I end up in Finland in November meeting with them. And
oh my goodness.
It's freezing cold, and I'm there, and I'm just like, okay, let's see what this is going to be like, right? And funny backstory is I had my brother-in-law come with me too, and I told him, I was like, hey, I'm going to meet with these people for a day, maybe 2 days, but probably nothing's going to come of it. We'll hang out in Helsinki, get to see the sights, and then we'll come home. And it's like, okay, cool. So we get there, and what was really interesting, what caught my attention is they did this presentation about how they ended up finding us, why they were persistent about it, and what they see the 5-year vision. And I was like, did you hear this from me? Because we have the same exact ideas here. And so that was kind of like a moment to say, wait a second, we're definitely on the same page here. And then, they walked us around their building and things like that. And it's basically like a 10-story co-working space. Like it's a telco company, right? So think of like AT&T, T-Mobile, like that kind of like 100-year-old company. But like they're so progressive in how they approach work culture and team dynamics and values that I was just like, oh, we're seeing eye to eye here, right? This looks like a cool place to be. So that's kind of really what inspired me to say, okay, let's see how we can take this forward. So the synergy there was, aside from the financials of it, it was the shared vision, the shared values, and the ability to expand internationally, because I had no experience with that. They were a huge company that had offices all over the world and the resources to be able to bring our product to a huge market that we wouldn't otherwise be able to penetrate. And so that's how I ended up talking to Elisa, is the company name. And that's how CalcuQuote became a part of it.
Wow. What were they looking for? Just another, what was the synergy for them of this solution with their other products?
So Elisa's, it's a very fascinating telco story. So they were a traditional telco I think they were the first telecom company in Finland. So basically the founder called Alexander Graham Bell and was like, I want one of those. So really cool origin story. But basically how that moved forward is around 10, 15 years ago, they got into this mindset of, well, a typical telco continues to grow by adding users, right? Like that's how you do it. You take more market share. Well, Finland's a small country. How do you continue to grow and exceed expectations of the market if you're in a small market? And expanding internationally as a telco is much harder because you're dealing with regulatory requirements and government issues and lobbyists and all this stuff, right? And so what they did is they said, we got to figure out a way to keep the same capital expenditure and get more efficiency out of our network. And so what they did is they started applying machine learning algorithms to their infrastructure. So they became, and they, I think today are, the most efficient telco network in the world. Like when Netflix does their bandwidth testing, they do it in Finland. Because it's so efficiently run. So they applied these machine learning algorithms and saw that, hey, we can have huge amounts of success. And machine learning back then was not even called, I don't know what it was called, right? But it was this abstract concept, but they had all these data scientists being able to do these cool things. So they said, I wonder where else this could apply. And so they started talking to factories. And the factory said, well, what could help us is, and they took similar types of concepts from the machine learning they were applying to the telco side and said, let's see if we can create products for the factory. So they started doing that, and it was wildly successful. And then the factory owner said, what really creates turbulence in our factories is the supply chain, because you can have all the control you want inside your four walls, but it doesn't matter if the materials never show up. And so that's where this idea of supply chain came in, and hence CalcuQuote.
Wow. I love that.
It's a long stretch to get there, but it makes sense to understand that origin.
Oh, big time. Big time. Yeah, because in my mind, I'm just like, telco, it just seems like another we'll just throw this on there in revenue. But no, it's such a very precise solution for them. That's really slick. So going through this process and the reason to say yes, besides the ones that you lined out, that great, we're on the same page. This is how I would like to be acquired if we're going to do this, was also what it gave you in kind of taking that aspect as, that maybe there's other competition coming in and taking this outside capital, not only to help break into these other markets, but it just helps you scale that much faster and kind of get in front of that competition, correct?
Absolutely. Yeah. We had, early on, we had one of my longtime mentors kind of gave me this piece of advice when we were already at that point, we were cash flow positive, we had revenue, we could be a nice little sustainable small company. And his point was, he said, just keep in mind, right? If you're actually successful, others will copy, right? That's bound to happen. And so the question is, will you be so far ahead of them by then that they can't catch up? Otherwise, somebody else will get the idea of raising some capital and going just a little bit faster, and they'll catch up and overtake you. And then your small little business that you care so much about your employees and your team and all that stuff, you're putting them in jeopardy by not going that route, right? And so he was like, how confident are you that you have a sustainable business? I said, yeah, I'm very confident. He goes, great. Then don't you think somebody else could create it with a little bit of capital the same way that you did, right? And I was like, yeah, I'm not so confident. I don't have such an ego to say that nobody else can do what I can do, right? That there are smarter people in the world that can do things better and whatever. So it's really just a matter of how you execute those resources. So that was kind of the first signal to say, okay, you should think about raising some capital. And so at that time, we'd raised a little bit of capital. But then with this international expansion, that was kind of the second signal, is we started to see that there was some interest in what we were doing. When we first started off, the suppliers we worked with and the customers we worked with, it was like, what is this thing, right? They were getting acquainted with the idea. But then as it became more common, you started to see all these huge companies talking about digital transformation and automation of the supply chain, all that stuff. And I was like, all these people are talking about this. Someone else is going to read between the lines and say, I can create a product for this too. And so that was kind of my thinking to say, well, we need to add some fuel to this fire, right? We know we have something that works. We have a superior product. We have a message that resonates with customers. We have a team that's in place. Now we got to be able to take that more broadly and faster. And so that was to me the signal to say, yeah, if it's working, then you got to make sure it's working at scale. Otherwise, somebody else will figure that out.
Yeah. And I love that distinction because, it allows you to go and maintain that first mover advantage, right? It does you no good if, like your mentor described, you get trampled on because someone just copies and they just have more capital. But if you can create that distance and get that moat around your business, right? That makes it so hard for somebody else to catch up, to copy, and all of that. But that distinction also, that the order you did it in, right? Because I'm sure we've all seen examples in all industries, but I'm sure you've even seen in your industry where people go for the capital raise and the let's get wide and glossy and flashy first, and then we'll kind of figure things out, and that's a it happens every day, sadly. But so for you to now go, I would imagine it makes the capital raise easier, as difficult as it is anyway, makes that easier, makes the acquisition easier when you know that you've got this confidence that, okay, this company is solid. We know what we're doing. We just need to expand.
There's this analogy that I've heard described about like how to and when to infuse capital into a business that I think what's interesting here is if you think about a fire, right? Like if there is no fire and you add more wood, it doesn't create a fire, right? Like first you need a small fire, right? So you need a starter fluid or like something to start that fire, and that's the entrepreneur, right? And then as the fire gets going, again, if you put just a pile of lumber on top of it, the fire suffocates. So if you infuse too much cash into a business, it doesn't do you any good. You still got to figure out how is that fire going to continue to spread for it to become a bonfire. And so I think that analogy really resonates with me because there is such a thing as either trying to raise money too early or trying to raise too much money or trying to raise money when you don't actually need money and you need execution. So there is a lot of those types of variables that come into play I'm sure you've seen a lot of these things too, as when people say, I have an idea and a pitch deck and I want some money, that's not enough, right? Like you got to show people that you're serious about it and can prove that there is a machine here that just needs some money to execute.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's strong. So now that this acquisition has happened, how has it been going? What are the positives? Any rough points along the way?
Yeah. So I'll say, overall, really good, right? I had very limited experience in like a corporate type environment before. I worked in consulting, so I've been a consultant for a bunch of Fortune 500 type companies in the past. And one of the things that I always, when I left that world, I was like, I never want to go back because there's a lot of stagnation, right? Like there's a lot of inertia. There's a lot of this is my turf type mindset. And I didn't want to go back to that, right? And even when we were going through this, one of my mentors at the time told me, he's like, you know what, like just you've got to just grind it out, right? Like you're going to go through this process and you'll be miserable for a few years, but it'll be worth it because you'll get some money. And I was like, no. That's not how I want to think about this. I'd rather think about this as like, is this going to help the company thrive long term? And so the outcome so far, and granted, it's only been a little over a year, but it's been really positive in a few different ways, right? One of my core things was I wanted to be able to continue to execute on the vision and have the autonomy to be able to execute on the vision. And so far, it's been awesome from that perspective. We're continuing to operate as a startup, which I love. It feels a little scrappy and fast and volatile sometimes, but that's where I thrive. So I think that's really important. The second thing is there's never been an issue of, if something doesn't go according to plan, or, it's not like this, hey, we're your boss and you told us you were going to do this and it didn't work out that way. Now let's figure out who there is to blame. It hasn't been that way because that's not healthy, right? So back to the shared values, they had this fail forward type mindset that I really valued. And that's exactly how we've operated for so long. So that was really positive. And then I think the third thing is the resources. And I don't just mean the financial resources. I'll give you an example. We were dealing with this machine learning problem for like 9 months, right? And it was just a headache. Like we were making progress on it, but it was very incremental and we kept like hacking away at it. And then I mentioned it to somebody in ELSA and he goes, we have a machine learning team. Like, why don't you just talk to him? Right. And so we talked to him and he's like, and so the machine learning team, they're like, do you mind if we put one of our people on this just to see what they can do? Like, we'll analyze the problem. In a week, they made more progress than we had in 9 months. Right. And so it was like, oh, like, it's not about the money. It's about the network. It's about the people. It's about the expertise. All of those things are what you want, because it's all about, at the end of the day, it's about being able to execute to that vision. And for that, money can't buy success. People buy the success, and they've got people that can help out and be willing to help out.
That's awesome. And I'm sure that's an evolution, right? Like that's after that one, you go like, oh, okay. Well, then then it becomes
I have stomach
okay.
problems too.
Yeah, exactly. That's like one of those things like, oh, we can help you out a little bit. Awesome. And you like roll out your list. It like rolls across the room. Like, let's go.
Absolutely. Well, it's cool to say that so the like the hierarchy that we fall under within LSA is industry. So it's all of their industrial software business. And one of the cool things about it is one of their core things that they're always talking about is how are we going to be a good home for startups and scaling businesses.
Oh,
And
wow.
they distinguish themselves from VCs from that way because it's not supposed to be a high pressure growth. It's supposed to be sustainable growth in this sector, right? And so from that perspective, they're thinking long term, but they're also thinking startup mindset. So we're going to leave you alone to do what you do well, but let us know we've got things behind here that can help you. You just say the word. So
Yeah.
that's been really cool.
Yeah, that's awesome. Because we joke in terms of just like, oh, somebody, take all these things off of me, but it really it's a benefit to them. The more you succeed, the faster you succeed, the better for them, without a doubt. Um, so moving into particularly the European market now, how far into that process are you?
So I mean, just in terms of numbers, I mentioned earlier we had a handful of customers in Europe before, and we were struggling. Today, 25% of our customer base is actually outside the United States, and that's
Wow.
just from the last year-ish worth of work. So doing really well on that, right? So kudos to our European team. So we hired a bunch of people last year around this time. So Q4 of last year, 2020, we made a bunch of hires in Europe. So we have people in Germany, Italy, Finland, Spain, and they're doing sales, they're doing account management, they're doing product stuff. So we've kind of built up that operation. The really interesting thing about that is how do you continue to maintain that team culture and that startup mindset when you're all over the world, you don't get to see each other because of COVID, and you're working in different time zones, so you can't do the virtual happy hour thing because it's too early to drink in Dallas and it's too late to drink in Finland. Like those kinds of challenges became really important to solve for us to maintain that team dynamic. But overall, I mean, it's going well. Of course, like any business, our ambitions are up here, and we're okay to shoot for the stars and, or what is it, shoot for the moon and land in the stars kind of thing. So our ambitions are always really high, but overall it's going really well. And, we've learned a lot along the way. So even working with Elsa and working with the new hires, one of the things that we had grossly underestimated is the ramp up time for entering a new country. We were thinking, in America, we were able to do this in 6 months and start getting customer traction and all of that stuff. Well, it's very different when you're the founder of the company and you can go directly work on the product. And, customer says, if it had X feature, I would buy it. And you say, give me till tomorrow and I'm going to build it, right?
Right.
Much harder when you have a team of 40 people who are on the product team that have a product roadmap that they're executing to. And you're saying, hey, there's a customer in Europe that a salesperson's talking to that now you have to translate that to a product manager who translates it to the developer who turns it into a requirement. It gets a little bit more complex. And so we definitely faced some of those struggles as we've scaled. But overall, I think we're still extremely responsive to customer feedback and growth and maintaining that startup mindset of we will adapt to accommodate our customers.
Yeah, because it's still early stages, right? Like overall, but especially like moving into these markets. Do you have those systems in place that I'm sure you're building them as you go a little bit too, of that exact structure? Like, okay, if this comes in from, a potential client, who gets pinged, where that goes out to and all of that.
We've oscillated quite a bit between we need a process for this and we just need to work together as a team and be ad hoc about it. And there's trade-offs on both sides. So I'll give you an example. So when we did our last wave of hiring last year, right? One of the things we realized is we didn't actually have an onboarding process for employees. It was just like, get started, we'll figure it out. It's fine. We're all friends here. Like we'll make it work, right? Much harder to do when you're talking about 6 different time zones. So that was one example. But then even as we got into, okay, like if there was product feedback, we started off having no process because it was like, well, if there was any product feedback, talk to so-and-so and they'll figure it out and prioritize it and do something with it. Well, as we scaled, it was like, no, we probably need a way to capture that feedback. So we signed up for a software service that lets you capture customer feedback and turn it into something. And then we realized, wait, that's a little bit overly formal. It's not really getting to the essence of what the customer wanted because things are getting lost in this telephone game between people. And so I've switched back and said, you know what, like use the form, don't use the form. It doesn't matter. All that matters is the happy customer. And like, if we're all focused about how we're going to get customers and keep them happy, then we will figure out the rest. And we're not too big that we can't just talk to each other and figure out how to solve problems. So that's where we're at right now. Ask me in 6 months and we might have oscillated the other way.
Yeah, I can see those benefits. And that's the ideal, right? Is like the system that is almost, bakes in the conversations, bakes in the human interaction. Like step 6 is you have to talk to this person or something, because that is such a big part of it, because you want those triggers, because we all are human. You want those triggers so that even that salesperson talking to that potential customer has even just their own system to ping them and go like, oh, yeah, I wonder where we are on that one thing. Because if I could tell them it's in there, I could go make a sale tomorrow, and all of, yeah, it's all beautifully messy, right?
Yeah, I always say like there's always a process, but the process is kind of like how, it's kind of like how sausage gets made, right? Like, yeah, it's messy. It'll work out at the end, but you gotta kind of go through it a little bit. And of course, as we scale, we do have to standardize some things just to make sure that we are, checking all the boxes for our customers. We don't want to go into a customer interaction and look disorganized. So there is some element of that, but overall, I think it's just as long as you have this mindset of solving problems for customers, then we'll figure the rest out.
Yeah, and I think that's really strong, and that's almost a prerequisite as you bring people on the team, right? Like, make sure that yes, this is a full-time job and this is this type of role, but we're still a startup here. We do have that scrappy mentality. We want to interact and make sure that you're in that same mindset.
Absolutely. In fact, just a few weeks ago, I was on some interviews, and it was funny because I interviewed this one person, and about 20 minutes into the interview, I was like, hey, you applied for this job, but I think you'd be better at something else. Can I describe it to you and see if you'd be interested? And they're like, that's not the job I applied for. I'm like, yeah, but that's okay. Like, we'll find, like, if you're a good person, we'll find a home for you, right? Like, what we need is good people, and the rest will figure itself out. And so we've tried to maintain that, it doesn't have to be this stuffy way of like, here's the role you fit into, and don't break out of your territory. It needs to be a very collaborative environment where everybody feels like they get to make the most impact possible in their day.
Oh yeah. That's almost a great little part of a job interview to bake in. Let's see how they react to this.
Maybe I should start intentionally doing that. Miscreate a job description and see.
Exactly. They'll be like, okay, check. All right, we got you. So what's next? What as you're moving forward in terms of expansion, in terms of product evolution? What's next for you?
Yeah, so we have so many things going on simultaneously, which is both exciting and overwhelming. So a few things. One is I mentioned this earlier, we're in this like next wave of hiring now, right? So we wanna be able to take our message now in a broader scale than we are right now. So we have salespeople in all these countries. Now we want to turn this into a brand. And so that means instead of doing only direct selling, we want to be able to do, people recognize and know what CalcuQuote means, right? So that's kind of the next evolution for us, is we want to be recognized within our industry. The second part of that is we want to continue to expand. And that doesn't just mean, through direct sales. So we came up with this like 2 years ago, I think, but I call it the 3-dimensional growth strategy. So basically, if you think about like 3 axes, like a 3D chart. You'd have geographical expansion, customer segment expansion, and then functionality. And so that means, we've already started working on all three, but expanding to Europe is an example of the geography stuff. Currently, we work with contract manufacturers primarily, but we're finding a really good fit for some adjacent companies to that. So cable assembly companies, other types of contract manufacturers, original equipment manufacturers that are also interested in what we're doing. It's just slight modifications to the product required to meet their use case. So that's kind of the customer segment. And then functionality wise, we started with quoting, where we just need to provide a quote to the customer. What we've added in now is purchasing, being able to do like an e-commerce experience, data connections, all of those things as well. So we have a bunch of
within the software itself.
It's more starting to look like an ecosystem of softwares now instead of an individual software application that's all in one. So basically, you can pick and choose and adapt a solution to whatever the enterprise needs.
Very slick.
Yeah.
So great. I'm excited to just continue to watch your amazing journey there with the company and personally and all of that. So I'm excited for what you've put together and so impressed. I love it.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for sharing this experience.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a new challenge like every week, and that's what I love about it. I had when I left my consulting job, my boss told me, he's like, one day you're going to realize you're sitting in the same desk that you were the year before, and that's when you'll quit your job. And I was like, fortunately, I'm still in the same desk, but it's been a different job every year as we've evolved as a company. So it's been an exciting experience.
Oh yeah. And I think that's that little aspect that's common amongst most entrepreneurs, that they've got that piece that like that need for newness and constant evolution is just a little bit higher than maybe the general population,
Yes.
So how can folks reach out to you and learn more about CalcuQuote?
Absolutely. So I'm reachable through LinkedIn. So if you just go to chintansutaria.info, I think that takes you to my LinkedIn profile. I'm fairly active on there. And then CalcuQuote.com, and that's spelled exactly like it sounds, Calcu, like calculator, quote.com. And it's funny, we have a chat widget on there, and sometimes I'll just start replying to chat messages as well. So variety of different ways to get a hold of me personally, as well as get a hold of the company, CalcuQuote. And we have a bunch of job postings out right now too. So if anybody's interested in joining our band, then apply for those, or just reach out and say, this is what I do, and I think I could be helpful.
Fantastic. Are you looking like job-wise worldwide, mostly US? Where right now?
Yeah, we're really not geographically bound because we're a 100% virtual team. And so, we've got people in Spain, Germany, Italy, Finland, US. We'd like to be in one of those countries, but, if we find somebody great in another country, then we're open to it.
Awesome. We'll see you all next time. Thanks so much for tuning in and being a part of this show. If you ever need help building out custom strategies for your business or deciding what actions to take next, head over to MediaLeadsCo.com and let's connect. I'll talk to you soon on the next Strategy and Action.